You know, in Japan, when you have a big event and it gets rained on, we have this culture where we look for someone to blame. And we call that person ame otoko or ame onna. That means rain boy or rain. And so what we do is find out who was it that wasn't here last time it was sunny. And the time they came, did it rain last time as well? You're the reason why it's raining this time. My first Navigator conference was in 1994 in Virginia, and I think probably the snow boy, because we got snowed out badly. It was so cold, and we had it in this little cabin. It was like 10 of us at the Navigator conference. It was so cold that the water in the toilet froze, and the toilet cracked in half. If some of you are suffering with a cold, and I know everyone coming from stuck on the highway, it's probably my fault. Let's start first with a little bit of this lesson. So, me, ganbatte kudasai. Okay, one more time. Ganbatte kudasai. Okay. Gomenasai. Gomenasai. So, ganbatte kudasai means do your best. Gomenasai means I'm sorry. Quite different meanings. And my sister and I, several years ago, we were climbing Mount Fuji. Anyone here climb Mount Fuji? Japan's tallest mountain, 12,500 feet. We're climbing Mount Fuji, and as we're going, you hear different things along the way. You may bump into someone here, gomenasai. And then and a stranger sees you, and they say to you, ganbatte kudasai. And then you bump into someone else, and you hear them say, gomenasai. Then you hear another one, ganbatte kudasai. Well, my sister heard this over and over again as we're climbing, and she gets to station 8. She has another 2 hours climbing, and she has to use the bathroom. She goes to the bathroom, she pays her 100 yen, and she stall. In Japan, if you want to know if someone's in the stall, you knock on the door. You knock twice, and what's the response if they're in the stall? They knock back. Okay? In America, if it's on, you just pull the door. If it's unlocked, you just pull the door. In Japan, it doesn't always work. So my sister walks up to the stall, pulls the door open a little bit. She pulls it open, and there's a woman there doing this, minding her own business. And my sister was completely embarrassed, but she was never afraid to share her cultural knowledge. So she reviewed in her mind quickly, and she looked at the woman, and she said, ganbatte kudasai. And shut the door. And the poor woman just thought, what a crazy experience. This girl just told me to do my best on the toilet, and walked out. That's how I feel coming into this space. We have been out of the U.S. now. This is our 18th year. This is my first American college conference in over 16 years. Coming in, opening the door, I have no idea what to say. I have no idea what's going on, but by faith, we're going to launch ahead today. Very exciting. First, I want to say thank you to and to Jenny and Jonathan, everyone else who have made this possible. You just would not believe, past 36 hours or so, how complicated this thing has been. And Jenny, you've done a fantastic job. It's very exciting. Let's give Jenny applause. I also want to say thank you to you for your most precious gift, and that's your time. To get on the car and come over here and spend time with us together. This is the biggest investment you make. This time you'll never get back again. This investment. I'd like to introduce myself. Let's see here. Okay, there we are. This is my family, Jen and I. Jen, she'll share her story a little bit. But Jen was on staff with the Navigators for 10 years in Southern California. And we have Abby, who is 18 years old and heading out to college in Chicago this coming year. And my son Josiah is 16, and our youngest is. And Abby was born in the U.S. Actually, she was born in Lincoln, Nebraska. And the younger two were made in Japan, so a little bit higher quality. Yeah. It was 1994, and I was standing on the beach on the shores of Mount Fuji, near Mount Fuji. And I had been in Japan for about 15 months, and I had this amazing experience. During that time, we saw 10 Japanese make a decision to follow Christ. That had never happened to that point, 10 in 1 year. It's never happened since then. And I was a successful Navigator staff, my first time out on the field. And I was talking to this Japanese staff woman, Ki-chan. And I said, well, I'll come back one day. And she looked at me and she said, don't. Because everyone says that. And they never back. And the folks that use Christ will spend the rest of their life in the midst of a hostile majority while you go back to your country. And so I was shocked by that. I was rebuked. I'm like, what's wrong with her? She's got some, I did my best here. Went back, and that was kind of a time bomb that God set in my heart. As a result of that, I came to the University of Nebraska for 4 years and worked with fraternity men. Any fraternity men? Okay. Worked with a bunch of Sig Eps and Delta guys and Lambda Chi guys. Been a great time. And then in 2001, a week after 9/11, we've been there as a family, living and discipling among the lost. And I have spoken at some conferences. One about 3 or 4 weeks ago, we had about 100 people there. The only difference was it was about 90% non-believers. So that's kind of our Navigator world in Japan. Well, before we start, I want to talk about what am I not going to talk about this weekend. And one thing I'm not going to talk about how to do the campus ministry. That's like opening a toilet on Mount Fuji and saying the wrong things. I have no idea how to do the campus ministry in the U.S. That's why you have your campus directors. They are experts in how to do the campus ministry. Another thing I'm not going to talk about is I'm not going to recruit you to join some kind of. I'm not going to try to recruit you to join the Navigator staff. I'm not going to recruit you to get to this event. That's not what this is about. A third thing I'm not going to do is I'm not going to invite you to come overseas. This guy's coming in from Japan. He's telling this story about the beach on Mount Fuji. Oh, I got to sit through like 2 days of guilt about me not becoming a missionary, I am not here to talk to you about going overseas. I'm not interested in that. We are going to be spending some time talking about what's the overarching purpose behind all of those things that we'll be doing. Next, I'd like to talk about what I am going to speak about. The Navigators have a calling. God has given us a calling, and it goes something like this. To advance the gospel of Jesus into the nations, to advance the gospel of Jesus and his kingdom into the nations through spiritual generations of laborers, living and discipling among the lost. That's a mouthful. How many of you guys have heard that before? That statement. Okay. Several years ago, the Navigators did a survey of our graduates, and they sent out, how many was it, Jenny? 5,000, 10,000? They surveyed people just like you after college, 5,000 to 10,000 of you. And they were looking for 3 data points. The first thing they asked was about, are you walking with God? Are you living in the spiritual disciplines? Second, they asked, are you living in biblical community? And thirdly, they asked, are you living and discipling among the lost? And this was amazing. It was the first time in Navigator history they did this research. And they were so excited when the results came back. The first one, are our graduates walking with God? Are they living in the spiritual disciplines? And they got a big check mark. Navigators know the Bible. We memorize the Bible. We abide in the Word. We pray. We spend time every day with God. That's a deep discipline that you're being trained in. Number two, are they living in biblical community? Big check. Most Navigators graduates are part of a traditional institutional church, or they're in some kind of missional community. Almost over 85% of the people were there. Let's look at the third one. Are we living and discipling among the lost? And we got a big X. Not that it wasn't happening, but compared to the other two, it was incredibly low. And that's when the Navigator said, we have a lot of work to do. And that's the reason, the third thing I like to talk about is, why are you here this weekend? You're here because, and those of you who are not here, you're here gathered somewhere else watching me on the screen. You know, I love Star Wars, and I wonder, Bob is trying to explain to me how this whole technology thing works, and I wonder if I'm kind of like Princess Leia. Am I like a hologram right now? How cool is that? You know? I mean, if I'm a hologram right now, you know, help me, Obi-Wan. I mean, that would be just completely epic. If you could pull that off, Bob, I would really appreciate it. But you are here because you have been identified as not as a participant of the Navigators, but you have been identified as a member of a movement. And we want to invite you to join our calling. I'm not inviting you to join an activity, an event, a staff, or anything like that. We would like to invite you to join our calling, to advance the gospel of Jesus and his kingdom into the nations through spiritual generations of laborers living and discipling among the lost. So this weekend, we're going to look at these two things. I'd like you to imagine, this is what it means to be a navigator, actually. Some people say it's about discipleship, it's about scripture memory. It's really about these two things. It's about spiritual generations of laborers who are living and discipling among the lost. And imagine these are like two wings on an airplane. Any aeronautic engineers in the room? Okay, then I'm gonna go ahead and say something about that, since no one knows anything about that. As far as I know, without both wings, the airplane will not stay alight. And for the navigators, these are our two wings. Spiritual generations of laborers living and discipling among the lost. Each one by themselves is actually not that difficult. Let's take the second one. Living among the lost is actually really easy. Every non-Christian in the world, that's what he does every day. That's simple. That's what most of the world is already doing. Spiritual generations of laborers, that's a little harder. But within a Christian context, if you're around believers all the time, it's not difficult to see generations of laborers, is it? But what happens when we put these two together? What does it look like to go after spiritual generations of laborers who are living and discipling among the lost? This is the great task, project, that God has asked us to do as navigators. And we want to invite you to that. So, I don't know if you view yourself this way, but from this day forth, you are a navigator. You don't have to be a navigator staff to be a navigator. If you're in this room, let me make sure no one from the hotel is in here. I don't think they are. Everyone in this room is now officially a navigator. we have invited you to join our calling. And at the end of this time, as you respond to God in that, the rest of your life, no matter what church you join, no matter what kind of activities you do, as you embrace that calling, you are a navigator. Today we're going to look at an oldie but a goodie, and I thought, someone said, Mark, you're not going to talk about Matthew chapter 9 again, are you? I mean, come on. That thing is so teased out. That's been like the go-to for the navigators forever, and I said, no, I'm not going to talk about that. And I did all my research, and after hours and hours of getting ready for this talk, we're going to talk about Matthew chapter 9. You'll see why in a minute. Let's read this together. And Jesus went throughout all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every disease and every affliction. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. You know, Jesus is traveling through different areas. And as he goes through these areas, he's proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom. He's ministering in power, healing every disease, every affliction. He's anointed with the Spirit of God. And then the next sentence, verse 36, it says, when he saw the crowds, he had compassion. I think one of the reasons that Jesus had compassion is because he saw the crowds. He saw people. Over and over again, you see he saw people differently, didn't he? The woman at the well, the way he saw her was so different. Zacchaeus, the people in the town and the way Jesus saw them were incredibly different. Jesus had eyes to see people's spiritual needs and who they were. And then it says he had compassion for them. And I've been thinking about this word compassion a bit. And compassion was defined this way: a feeling of deep sympathy and sorrow for another who is stricken with misfortune. And this feeling is accompanied with a strong desire to alleviate that suffering. Compassion is basically a negative emotion. Do you see that? It's sorrow. It's an emptiness. The word compassion comes from the Latin roots, I believe, and it means to suffer with. Compassion is suffering with someone else. When you see someone else in a terrible situation, your heart suffers in the same way that theirs does. My son plays basketball, and he didn't, in junior high, he didn't get to play. He didn't think he was going to make the team. He made the freshman year. Sophomore year, he's not good enough to get on the varsity. He's on JV. But he was selected to be the captain of the team. And man, I was so stoked. I was never asked to be the captain of anything growing up. And my kid's the captain. Well, this is pretty awesome. And so his first game of the season, I'm in the stands, and he sees me coming, and he looks back at me, and my heart's racing to see what's he going to do. And he's in track. He's a short distance runner, so he's a 100-meter guy. So he's maybe the fastest guy on the team. So the other guy gets a breakaway, and Josiah chases this guy down. He goes up for a layup, and Josiah tries to block him. It was a terrible foul. Totally whacked the guy. But they come down together, and my son lands on his arm like this, and he dislocates his shoulder blade. It pops out of the shoulder. Anyone have a dislocated shoulder before? Pretty painful, wasn't it? And, he gets up and he's playing like this, with one hand, and the coach pulls him out. What happened? He says, I think I messed up my shoulder. And he's on the bench. And I went up to him and I said, son, what happened? And
And he says, I think I dislocated my shoulder. And so for me, how did my son was suffering. I was immediately and naturally suffering with him. I had the exact same longing for him to play, for him to become the captain, for him to serve in that way. And now I know that's a season-ending injury. This may be the end of his basketball career, like that. And instantly, I'm on the internet, I'm on my phone, trying to figure out how do you fix a dislocated shoulder. And I'm researching all these web pages. Compassion is a feeling of deep sympathy and sorrow. What did I do wrong here? We okay? Oh, there we go. It's a feeling of deep sympathy and sorrow for another who is stricken with misfortune, and this feeling is accompanied with a strong desire to alleviate the suffering. It's to suffer with other people. Compassion is the belief that we are connected by love. With my kid, that's natural. Even animals have that connection with their animals. C.S. Lewis talked about the loves, the 4 loves. Storge was actually the weakest of the loves. The love between a parent and a child. Jesus talks about a higher love. A love for strangers. A compassion even for your enemies. That when you see your enemies suffering, that you have sorrow for them. And that you want to alleviate that suffering. So what was he seeing about them? Well, this was the phrase here. Why did he have compassion on them? Because it says that they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Let me just unpackage that. He compares the lost people of the world to sheep. And, you look at them and that sheep is so cute. I mean, anyone into cute animals? Anyone cheer themselves up by cute animals? Okay. I met you at Jax's somewhere. I remember that. Yeah, I mean, that's so cute. So, Jesus had compassion on them because they're such cute sheep. And they want someone to take care of them. And they want someone to snuggle with them, and there's no one to snuggle with them. That's why Jesus had compassion on them. Right? No, that's not it. They were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. My son and I went to New Zealand, and we had a dream of taking the perfect New Zealand photo. That means beautiful green grass, beautiful mountains, this amazing blue sky, and one of sheep. There's more sheep in New Zealand than there are human beings. And so everywhere we went, we found all 3: sky, mountains, grass, and sheep. But every time we brought up our camera, the sheep would run away. After 1 week, we had about 500 pictures of sheep butts. I'm serious. After 500 pictures, we finally got one picture where the sheep was looking at us. Because sheep are incredibly timid and weak. And imagine sheep in the wild, what that must have been like. To be among wolves like this, to be harassed on every side, and to feel powerless. This guy with this guy. When Jesus looked out at the lost people of the world, he saw them as harassed and helpless. But as I come back to the U.S. and I hear Christians talking about non-Christians, I hear this whole victim story. I hear Christians talking about, we're the victim. And we're always being wronged. And everything that's happening in this culture, and we are now being marginalized. And now we're losing power. Jesus looked out on the lost and said, no, they are the ones that are victims. they are the ones that are harassed. They are the ones that are helpless. Why? Because they're like sheep without the shepherd. Sheep need a shepherd. And when Jesus saw them as the good shepherd, that's what he's longing to be to them. To protect them. To restore them. To give them life. Psalm 23. To lead them by still water. To preserve them. To develop them. So Jesus goes farther and he says to his disciples, he changes from this livestock illustration, I'm not sure why, but now he goes into agricultural illustration. And he says to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. This is Jesus' analysis of the situation in the world. What's the analysis? 2 words, abundance and scarcity. There's incredible abundance in the world. Jesus looks out and says, the harvest is plentiful. It's incredibly rich. It's overflowing. But the laborers are few. Many times when we look out at lost people, we have this scarcity mentality. And we say, oh, no one's interested in the gospel anymore. They'll never respond. This generation, blah, 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 blah. The Japanese, less than 1% are believers. They can't be reached with the gospel. I was in Japan for about 10 years, and I read this article. And it said, the Japanese will never become a Christian nation because the gospel came to Japan too late. And I was like, well, what am I doing here? This is impossible. But Jesus says no. He says the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. My friend Don is from Nebraska. I kind of wish I was from Nebraska sometimes. I'm from actually Washington, D.C. But he grew up on, I think, a wheat farm somewhere. Do they grow wheat in Nebraska, or maybe it was corn? There are places they grow. Where do they grow wheat?
Kansas.
Kansas. Okay, that's a different part of Nebraska. Yeah. So he told this story to us the other day when I was with him, and he said, my dad, one year, growing up on the farm, he was about 16 years old, his dad took him out in the field, and apparently he knew how to break some of the wheat off the top, and then he would look at it, and he would like crumble it, and then he would taste it, and he knew how many days until the harvest was ready. And he knew how to time the harvest to get the best yield. Any people from agricultural backgrounds here? You guys know what I'm talking about? Okay. Am I saying this right? Does that sound okay? All right. And he said, son, I think we're about 7 days out. Son, I think we're 5 days out. This is going to be our best yield ever. And they needed a good year. On the day of the peak day of the harvest, it was time to harvest, but he had a problem. He did not own a combine. But his brother did. But he always had to wait for his big brother to harvest his fields first. And he knew that his day would be the next day. So his brother went out and he was able to harvest all of his fields in one day. And his brother said, this is the big year for us. And so he said, okay, Don, to Don's dad, you can use the combine for the last hour of light. They go out there, they harvest about 10% of their fields, or whatever percent it was. And they were stoked. This is going to be huge. That night, there was an incredible hailstorm. You probably heard it coming, didn't you? You felt it, didn't you? The wind, the rain, the hail, they woke up in the morning, and the harvest was ruined. And they almost lost their farm. Jesus said the harvest is plentiful. The problem is we don't have enough combines. The navigators would want to develop you as a spiritual combine because the harvest is incredibly bountiful. So that's Jesus' analysis. Well, what's his request? This is interesting. We send out prayer requests to our donors all the time. You guys, anyone share prayer requests with your Bible study? You ever do that? Did Jesus ever give any prayer requests in the Bible? one time. Jesus gave one prayer request in the Bible. Therefore, pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. The harvest is huge. But for some reason, God has committed the task of reconciliation to us, not to the angels. And so he is asking his disciples to send out, to pray that God would send out laborers into his harvest. You know, it's interesting. He doesn't say, pray that God would raise up laborers. Navigators sometimes talk about that. We're about raising up laborers. We're about, raising up disciples. Jesus didn't talk about that. He talked about sending out laborers. The Navigators are not about kingdom, about building an empire. Like, we want to see, our goal is to have the biggest campus ministry on each campus. When you go to our headquarters and you hear our leaders, when Joe meets with his leaders, no one is talking about that. How do we get the biggest campus ministry on each campus? We don't care about that at all. We're not trying to gather people and create an empire. What we want it to become is a talent magnet. We want to create environments of grace and transformation where we attract people into our community and where they're developed to their full potential. And then they don't stay there. They get launched out everywhere. And as they leave, they create a void where more people can come in, and we continue to send out laborers. So we have a plan for your life. We want to send you out as a laborer into the harvest field. Everyone, let's stand up for a minute. We're halfway through tonight, so I'd like you to stand up and leave your books down. Let's just take a little, I'm going to get a drink of water. So let's everyone turn to your right and give a little massage. Okay, let's work the muscles, okay? Turn back the other way because this guy on the end here is looking kind of sad, so turn back the other way. Okay. Someone get my wife up there. Yeah. All right. Someone get Bob Walls down here. Someone get Bob. Oh, it's great. All right. Have a seat.
No, that's how you doing, Bob?
Yeah, so we need combines. So Jesus, what is this going to look like? The heart, they're like sheep without a shepherd. So I think the natural thing would be, let's send out, what should we send out to help the sheep? There's sheep without a shepherd. What should we send out? Send out some shepherds, right? That's how we're going to deal with this problem. Who we got here? Yeah, this is it. This is what we're all about. That's you. Are we sending out shepherds? Or another possibility. Can you advance to the next slide? Sheepdog. Yeah, German shepherd. Maybe we could send out sheepdogs to take care of these sheep. Let's go to the next one. Even better. I mean, you got wolf problems? Let's send out some lions. But Jesus never says that, does he? What's his strategy? Let's move ahead a couple. This is good. How are we going to deal with that? Let's go back. This is the problem. The next chapter, Jesus says, I'm sending you out like sheep among wolves. Now, wait a minute, Jesus. Everyone said shepherds. Everyone said, we like the sheepdog idea. We like the lion. There's only one lion in this kingdom. That's the Lion of Judah. We're sent out as sheep. Question. What's the difference between those sheep and these sheep? That's the only difference. What is a laborer in God's kingdom? It's nothing more than a shepherded sheep. We're not shepherds. We're not sheepdogs. We're not lions. We're just like they are. The only difference is we have a connection with Jesus Christ. He develops us. He cares for us. And he sends us out into that vulnerable place. I want Jim to come up for a few minutes and share a little bit. What does this look like to be sent out as a shepherded sheep among wolves? How do you move from being a shepherded sheep, and how do you grow as a laborer?
It's always fun to travel with Mark, and we go to different parts of the U.S. and we get different reactions, and then we're in Japan, and my favorite memory is that first day we land in Japan. Mark's been there already; he can speak the language. We go to a restaurant. The waitress looks at me because I make sense, but he's talking. I'm going. So it's one of my favorites. And also just all over the U.S. we just get different reactions, but we have a great time. Have you guys ever seen a tapestry? And it's just this beautiful tapestry with a beautiful picture on it. But then you look in the back of the tapestry, and it's a mess. Thread going everywhere, knots are everywhere. There's some threads in there, you're like, what's the purpose of that? It looks so messy until you turn it around, then it makes sense. And there are some of those threads in my life that just doesn't make sense. It was a source of pain. And I just always wish that it would be cut out of my life. And that was relationship with my father. I was born in Korea, and when I was born, after my brother, my dad left our family and got involved with another woman. And they bore 2 sons. He comes back to our family, and that's why we moved to the States to kind of start over on our family. And my mom, being a believer, heard about these 2 boys and how the mother of those 2 boys also abandoned those boys. And she thought, that can't be. And so she wanted to adopt them. So they came and joined our family. And so we grew up in Virginia, and so I can pull off a really good Southern accent. But they joined our family, and it should have been a happy ending, but it wasn't. So often I think my dad, just struggling with a lot of shame, took out, expressed it with a lot of anger. And so there were a lot of physical violence that went on in our home, and a lot of us were often covered in bruises. And I just grew up just going, I hate this man. I wish, if he died, my life would be so much happier. My mom would be so much happier. It would be a happy ending. We just don't need this in our life. And I just hated him. I shut him out, and I treated him like he was dead. Until I went to college, and went to Virginia Tech, and that's where we both graduated. And I met the Nats my freshman year and got into Bible study. And my mom, being a believer, I often heard the stories, and I thought, man, this is great. Like, Jesus like died for me. That's awfully nice. I don't know why, but that's great. So I think I'll believe it. But it wasn't until I got into that first Bible study with the Navigators my freshman year, and I'm reading Matthew 5. I'm going, oh man, this is a little too close to home. And it's where Jesus says, you have heard it was said, do not murder. But then he goes on to explain that when you hate a brother in your heart and, call him a fool, that it's same as being a murderer. And I thought, wow, that's me. That in God's eyes, I'm a murderer. And then he showed me, he who knew no sin became sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God. And then I finally got it. I finally understood the gospel and why Jesus died for us. That Jesus, for me, he became that murderer. He took on that hatred that was so ugly and dark so that I might become right with God. And I remember that freshman year, that last quarter, I was studying for finals. I was also just so amazed by God's love. I sat on my desk in my dorm room and just giving my life over to Christ and Jesus, becoming that love that I always craved for. And he seemed to just fill my heart, and I was just bursting with love and joy, and I couldn't contain it. So I remember going all over campus. There's this one building where I was a math major, and I had friends studying in there till late at night. So I knew where all the Vietnamese were studying. I knew that the Indians were in that room. I knew so I would just go door to door, in my math hall, and I'd be like, hey, what's up? Hey, I gotta tell you the story, what happened to me tonight. And I would go to the McBride Hall 100, and the Indians were there. I'm like, Saeed, how are you doing? And I talked to him, he's like, what's going on? But I remember finally getting into my classroom to study. I'm gonna fail this test, I better study. And I remember out of nowhere, I had this desire to go home and love my dad. And I was scared, because I'm used to hating him. And I thought, wow, God, I know this is you. This is a miracle, because I didn't even ask you to do this. So I remember finishing my finals and going home for break. And I go home, and nothing had changed at home. And we were all back for a break, and my parents are starting to argue, and the argument turns into that fight, and you can just feel the anger building. And we're like, oh, it's gonna explode, and it did. And as often as he overthrew the table, and our dinner dishes are going everywhere. And this time felt different. Usually I would run up to my room, I'd beat my bed because I'm so hurt and angry. But this time I began to clean up the mess. And I looked over at my dad, and he was standing by the kitchen window with tears running down his face. And then I heard that voice, and it was kind of new. But you know that kind of voice in your heart? It's not audible. But the voice in my heart said, Jen, you know what love is now, because you know me, for I am love. But your dad doesn't know what love is, because he doesn't know me. So your lifetime commitment is to love him one way. And that's when I thought, Lord, I surrender. Please forgive me for all the hatred, and I want to do this. Will you help me to love my dad one way? And that's when our relationship from then on just turned 180 degrees. And before I would never talk to him. And after dinner, this time, we would talk for 2 hours. Like, Dad, what were you like when you were a little boy? And what did you want to become? And what was life like? And he was thrilled that I was talking to him. He wrote me a letter, my first long letter from him, my junior year, and I still have it. And it said, Jen, your love for me warms my heart and mind away. And God confirmed in my heart, Jen, keep at it. Love him, for you are shepherded. He is not.
That journey took about 15, 20 years before her dad came to know Christ, but it's a beautiful picture of when we are shepherded sheep, God begins to give us a perspective on other people of compassion. Jen began to see her father not as just a tyrant, but also as a victim as well. Lastly, I'd like to just touch on one point, and we're going to close tonight. And that's the idea of generations of laborers. We've defined laborers as these shepherded sheep who were sent out among wolves to bring the good news of the kingdom. But the Bible also talks a lot about generations. Generations are built not on effort, but they're built on maturity. There's 3 levels of maturity, basically. There's infants, there's children, and there's adults. There's that teenager thing in between the last 2, of course, which is kind of a mess. How many people can infants take care of? 0. Infants cannot take care of themselves. They're completely dependent upon others. Children, the goal of childhood is the child can learn to take care of one person, themselves. That they can gain a healthy independence and take care of themselves. The goal of becoming an adult is that you can take care of at least 2 people. Yourself and at least one other person. This is so connected to being a shepherded sheep. We want to see people grow spiritually out of just being infants, where someone has to take care of you all the time. My friend said to me, he's 40 years old, and he says to me, Mark, I think I'm going to change churches. I think I'm going to change churches. I said, well, what's wrong? And he says, I'm not getting very good feeding at my church. And I just wanted to say to him, are you like some kind of 40-year-old baby? That you never learned, you never became a child spiritually, where you can feed yourself? We believe that God wants each of you to grow to maturity, where you can feed yourself on the Word of God. Not so that you'll just remain as a child, but so you can grow to an adult, where you can take care of yourself, and you can become a spiritual parent for other people. This is the foundation for generations. I was at Virginia Tech, and I said to my Bible study, they'd all left the dorms. Guys, let's read the scriptures. They began getting a feel for God's love for people. They're now juniors. Guys, let's move back on campus. Let's move back into West AJ. Like, not that hall. That's not a good hall. That's a good one. That's where all the lost people live. Let's go there. 2 guys moved in. The guys who didn't move in, we all coveted it. We said, every week we'll spend at least 5 hours in that hall together, building relationships, sharing the gospel. This was amazing. Within 6 months, we saw 7 generations of disciples on that hall. I got a call from the Navigators Collegiate Director, and he said to me, Mark, this is the greatest campus ministry we have ever had. That did not happen. That story is a lie. If you believe that, that is a pipe dream. That is not the way spiritual generations happen. There was no phone call. There was no 7 generations in that hall. We did go water skiing with a bunch of guys. We started some Bible studies. And within a few years, some guys came to Christ. And then I shipped out to Nebraska. I didn't know what happened next. But 6 months ago, I was at a headquarters meeting. And my friend David from Atlanta, he said, you went to Virginia Tech? I said, yeah. He said, well, I said, how'd you meet the Navigators? He said, West AJ Hall. 5 years after I had left the campus. And he said, that was the main place where we saw people come to Christ. And I had never heard his story, but after 20 years, I saw God gave us generations. It's not a sprint. It's not even a marathon. It's a rainy slog through a swamp for us to see generations. Everything that you've been told that you're going to end up on top of a spiritual pyramid and you're going to be like the spiritual Amway leader and you're going to have all these generations underneath you, it just doesn't work that way. And if we tell you that's what it looks like, you will become disillusioned. It's really, really hard. But you know what? It's really, really worth it. And we want to invite you to that vision. Let's pray.